Welcome to Redditors. Please hit the like button. Let's get on with the video.
Redditors that host their home on Airbnb. What has been your worst experience with a guest? I used to travel a lot for work and I would put my apartment up on Airbnb while I was away. My apartment has a bunch of closets and drawers which I used to leave empty and at my guest's disposal. However, there is one closet in the bedroom which I kept locked cause it is where I keep my personal belongings. One time a guest left a bad review saying that the place had no storage space, which I was very confused about until I got home and saw my closet. Dude had tried to open it using brute force. The door was almost pulled off its hinges and the wood was chipped in some places. The door in question had 2 padlocks, and the perfectly usable closet on the opposite wall was untouched. He was looking for the loot. How dare you deny him? We are live-in hosts, so we are present while guests stay in our spare room. A guest arrived and immediately announced that they had himself during their journey. They then marked us down for cleanliness. Mate, use yourself. Also a guest who found a pair of my flip-flops in a wardrobe that they should not have opened, then shove over the bathroom floor, ruining my favorite flip-flops in the process. Also, a guest who went out drinking for 10 hours before checking in, meaning I had to collect them from the taxi, put them in bed in the recovery position, check on them when I woke up for work, then call the taxi company on their behalf when it turned out they lost their phone. Rented out to a group of 4 girls. Turns out they were going partying every day during their stay. I get called one day at 5 AM. It's the guard from my building telling me there's a passed out girl in the lobby's couch, puking and pissing herself. None of her friends had gone back to help her. Ruined the couch obviously. The next day they send me a message again. Another one of the girls had sprinted to the building stairs and also pissed herself. A guy I work with told this story how he hired a maid though a referral from his friend. She was great apparently and asked to stay there a couple times when he was gone. After he agreed to let her stay a few weeks when it wasn't being rented, however, she ghosted him. He ended up calling the cops and they checked up on her. She was there and although nervous, everything seemed normal. She later got a hold of him and asked to stay longer. He said no, clean it and get out. He comes back randomly to his house at 5 AM a few days later to someone sleeping in his downstairs room with dirty dishes and cigarettes everywhere. Ends up it's this maid's heroin addicted husband. He had been using it as a flop house and drug den. This guy escorted the husband out by gunpoint pantsless. The place was trashed downstairs, but apparently perfectly clean still upstairs. His TV was stolen but the husband brought it back and left it in the driveway so he didn't get charged with theft. Apparently there was little he could do about the free stay the husband took advantage of. Dude stole my $120 sneakers and broke my TV. A friend of mine rented to a girl who was convinced that there were cameras hidden all around the unit. She dismantled the lighting fixtures, picture frames, medicine cabinets, remote controls, etc. I worked in a call center that handles some of Airbnb's customer service, so one guest murdered 2 people in the host's home and got arrested there. Another guest was from a culture that eats iguanas and barbecued up a 7-year-old girl's pet iguana to serve to the family as thanks for hosting him. Another guest filled a mug with human shit and left it in the host's microwave. You really lose all faith in humanity working in customer service call centers. My friend's Airbnb guest taught their kitten to meow once, and then the quietest sweet needy cat turned loud and needy. Twas a curse that kept on giving long after he left. Not my story but a friend of mine's. He has an apartment in London, an urban area with dense houses and population. The apartment he hosted has this window facing Main Street which people tend to assume it's non-see-through but it's not. So the guy who stayed in it decided to sit in front of that naked and had a few beers, overlooking the great view. He must have fallen asleep or something and everyone passing by the road just had to see this poor creature. It was all on Snapchat at the time I recall. LMAO. My wife and I were hosts for about a year to make ends meet. We had just moved to a new town so she could attend grad school. Guests had full access to the 2nd floor while we lived on the 1st. Met a lot of cool people and ended up getting superhost status. Last guests we ever had were an older couple that had traveled a lot. They seemed fine and we had a nice conversation and they seemed fine with the accommodations. Keep in mind up until this point we had never gotten less than 5 stars from dozens of guests. Later that night I was at my job, bartending. Busy evening, and homeboy rolls up saying he needs to talk with me outside. I hurry out trying to accommodate him and also get back to my busy shift. He proceeds to lay into me at my place of work about how our space wasn't up to Airbnb standards and they won't be staying there, and some friends found them another place to stay that night. I was confused, but okay sure, but I'll give you the full refund you're asking for. He goes on his way. We refund everything we had gotten from them. Airbnb did not refund the taxes and fees per their own terms and conditions. I think his main complaint ended up being a spider web under the bed and that there wasn't AC upstairs. Mountain town on the east coast of us in the summer. It was warm but there were fans and it wasn't unbearable. I can understand why he'd want to stay somewhere else though. Anyways, we think it's all behind us and my wife and I embark on a cross-country road trip a few days later to check out the country and go see her family on the west coast. First day the guy starts blowing us up through Airbnb messaging saying he didn't get all his money back and to send him the rest. We had returned all the money we got. We told him to take up the rest with Airbnb and that we couldn't help him. He was flipping out saying we were bad at business and there were other avenues to get him his money back like Venmo and some other crazy stuff, to the point we had to contact Airbnb to take care of it so he would stop contacting us. He basically wanted us to pay him for taking away our opportunity to make some money off other guests that weekend and for him to insult us and our home. It was a crazy stressful situation at the beginning of a long trip and influenced us to find a roommate instead of continuing with Airbnb hosting. We also had a dude and his girlfriend who were probably in their late 40s get absolutely hammered, come back around midnight, and she was throwing up in the yard while he laid on our living room floor with our dog talking junk about his girlfriend and asking us for weed. They were alright but left about 40 empty cans up in the room for me to clean up. I hosted for a few years as a super host, and frankly I had lovely guests, very cool, intelligent, well-traveled, interesting people from all over the world. They were all pretty tidy too and considerate. The only annoying thing was people who talked way too much. Normally, people would exchange pleasantries and we'd chit-chat for a bit, which is totally fine, welcome, but every once in a while, I'd get a guest who talked non-stop from the time they got in until they went to bed. The rental suite was fantastic, like its own separate apartment fully stocked with everything I would want if I were a guest, and yet, there were a few people who had to hang out on my floor and talk. When I got an overtalker, sometimes I would hide when I heard them coming, so they'd go ahead to their floor. BC, I just could not stand someone talking at me from 7 PM until 11 PM. My mum did this. She had some people from out of country come stay. They moved the furniture around, swapped and most mattresses, left a massive pile of dishes in the kitchen. The bathroom was all buggered, and they must have been cooking and smashing clams or oysters shelling and around the BBQ outside. I went over to help my mum out a little after work for a bit, but it was a 2-day minimum cleanup job she had to do. Mum even had to bring in a cleaner lady to help as well. Needless to say, the people who stayed didn't get their deposit back and got a file reported on them. I'm embarrassed to say that I was not the host in this story. Me and my mate went out on a pub crawl in Prague during our gap year. I don't enjoy clubbing and the last venue on the crawl was a club, so I cut slightly earlier than my mate. Around 1 AM I got back into our apartment and went to bed. I was woken up by my friend at 4 AM and the entire kitchen was flooded. Not even exaggerating, there was like a reffing inch of water lining the floor, spewing rapidly out of a broken overhead pipe. I asked him WTF happened and he claimed he had woken up standing in it. Being unfamiliar with the house, I didn't know where the choke point in the pipe was to cut it off. We called the guy who owned the place, which was painstakingly slow given the time. We managed to get through to a family member who then contacted him. He arrived about 15 minutes later, in which time the water issue has become even worse. We had sealed off the room using a heap of towels to minimize the water leaving the kitchen, as it had tile floors while the rest of the house was hardwood, but this made it accumulate to about ankle height. The kitchen also had a sunken floor. Up until about 6 or 7 we were using pots to clear the indoor swimming pool from what used to be the kitchen. I didn't look like it had done a horrendous amount of damage once we were finished, but I imagine the water seeped through the floor and into the walls, causing all sorts of damage. What makes it worse is that it was a third floor apartment. My friend, being the one who originally found it, told the Airbnb property owner that it was like that when he woke up, but later told me that although he can't remember it, he thinks what must have happened is he'd wandered in from the club blackout drunk and tried to do a pull up on the pipe. That said, though, he wasn't wet when he woke me, so who knows what happened. I felt really bad for the host. A bit late to the party, but I have two. One dude stole my trimmer. This other guy took the cake though. When I took him the second key to the apartment that his mother needed, he opened the door slightly ajar and only extended his hand, palm facing up, to receive the key. Didn't want to shake my hand. Sent me messages complaining to me that drawers in the bathroom were full of personal stuff. One was full of items that we purposefully leave for guests to use, including new pads, soaps, toothbrushes. He was annoyed by this and said, "I'll just move this to one of the bedside tables in the master bedroom, shall I?" Which is also full anyway. There, we leave blocks and pens for guests to use, as well as reading material like The Economist or Guides to the City. This also annoyed him. He also complained about food that we leave for guests to partake of and be welcomed by. Upon leaving, guy leaves a massive, scathing review including hot takes like the linens and pots being worn out and needing replacement. They're not and they don't, they're also top of the line. Says the apartment was dirty upon entering. It wasn't. It was thoroughly cleaned before his arrival, as it is before every guest's arrival. He concludes by complaining the taxi ripped him off. I'm guessing the insinuation is that I was in cahoots with the taxi company? I don't know. His mother was nice though. I often wonder how parents who give birth to effing idiots feel about said effing idiots. My partner looks after an Airbnb for his friend's self-catering only. The house is an 1800s big country house. It is used primarily for large get-togethers and parties. Most guests are great and clean up well to get their deposit back. A group stayed and left the place pretty messy, but we couldn't figure out what the smell was. Turns out they left a full pig in a rubbish bag under the kitchen table. They tried to cook a pig on a spit and basically left its mainly raw corpse under the table. Every toilet was destroyed too. Must have eaten the semi-charred meat on the outside of the pig when drinking without realizing that it was raw. Not a host, was a guest. We stayed in a carriage house that was split into two apartments in Savannah. The host was the most wonderful southern personality I've ever encountered. Around 3 AM I woke up to a loud banging noise, like someone trying to break down a door. It got loud and louder, and eventually sounded violent. This went on for 20 minutes before my GF got out of bed and politely asked the neighboring guests to be quiet. They remained quiet for another 20 minutes and then they were at it again. This time much louder. Drunkenly they locked themselves out and decided that breaking the door down was their only option. The next morning when we left, the deadbolt was knocked out, the entire door frame was stripped off and the door was smashed to bits. We felt so bad for the host. It was going into a holiday and she had to cancel the next guest stay because of the damage. Stupid drunk college kids. There are almost too many to recall, but among the top ones was a bridesmaid who got drunk at a wedding and proceeded to violently assault her boyfriend BC. He wouldn't propose. She threw him into 3 walls, all requiring extensive repairs, which led to her arrest. The quality of guests has declined sharply as Airbnb has grown.